Welcome back to Pokemon episode summaries. Today, I'll be doing episode 179, Wings and Things. The episode begins with Ash and the gang walking along not a forest, but a road this time, as it was a nice sunny day. They suddenly noticed a Pokemon flying above them, and Ash used his Pokedex to find out that it was a Yanma. According to the Pokedex, Yanma was the clear wing Pokemon, and through the use of its two large eyes, Yanma can see in all directions at once. This Yanma then flew down and stole Ash's hat, causing Ash and the gang to pursue it. The Yanma then leads Ash and the gang straight to its owner, a boy named Zachary Evans. As it flies down to give its owner Ash's hat as a gift, Zack scolds it for flying off on its own. Yanma didn't care about the scolding whatsoever though, as it attempted to fly off once again, but thankfully, Zachary was able to grab hold of it. He then introduced himself to Ash and the gang, and apologized for Yanma taking Ash's hat as he returned it. Yanma continued to disobey, however, trying to fly off once more, and this time, Zachary wasn't able to hold it. His efforts were useless, even returning it into its Pokeball, as it simply dodged the beam and flew off into a nearby town, leaving Ash and the gang along with Zachary to track it once again. As Ash and the gang and Zachary approach the town, following Yanma close behind, they spot all the townspeople begin to barricade themselves inside their homes, shutting their windows and all of their shops to make sure that none of their shop supplies were destroyed. With all the citizens now inside buildings, Zachary yelled at Yanma to come back, but the Yanma disobeyed again and simply flapped its wings to create a strong wind. This finally made Ash and the gang realize why all the townspeople were so afraid of the Yanma, as the winds were so strong that a nearby window started breaking. The window of a bakery. Zachary sadly manages to recall Yanma into its Pokeball, as due to it flapping its wings, it had stopped in its tracks for a while, and he admits to Ash and the gang that this had happened several times before. Which must have been why all of the townspeople were already scared of Yanma right as it arrived. Yanma being a previous offender was confirmed when the owner of the bakery angrily walked up to Zack and yelled at him for letting his Yanma attack his store yet again, insinuating that Yanma had done it before. Zachary protests that he wasn't commanding Yanma to do this, he was doing it of its own accord, stating that he would never order his Pokemon to beat its wings so fast, especially in a town where it could cause as much damage as it had. But the man simply saw Zack as trying to make up a whole bunch of excuses, so he decided to punish Zack by bringing him to his father, where he would have to explain himself. Zachary tries to protest, but the man named Mr. Strussel literally drags him to his father's greenhouse, and Ash and the gang follow, where he happened to produce glass, worried for Zack. As soon as Mr. Strussel arrives at the greenhouse and explains to Zack's dad, Mr. Evans, what happened, Mr. Evans immediately apologized to Mr. Strussel and ordered his son to apologize as well, which he obliged, as he didn't want to upset his father. Mr. Strussel denied the apologies and stated that if they were truly sorry, then Zack's dad would make Zack get rid of the Yanma so it wouldn't cause any more trouble, stating that it was breaking far too many windows. Mr. Evans, not wanting to upset his fellow townspeople, tells his son Zack that he should do as Mr. Strussel asked and release the Yanma, but Zack obliged that he was trying his best to train it so that it wouldn't break any windows, and although Zack's father knew this, he still demanded that Zack release Yanma by sunset today, stating that it was putting his reputation at too much of a risk. Zack's dad felt bad for the Yanma, but he couldn't afford to put his reputation in harm's way. Zachary then storms off, not wanting to release Yanma, and Ash and the gang follow him to a park to try and comfort him. They try and convince him to do as his father asked, as his father was likely just trying to save the reputation of his glass shop, because, understandably, the rest of the residents might think that Zachary was purposely destroying all the windows so that his dad could make more profit because they would have to buy more glass. Zachary was still adamant on not releasing Yanma, though, leading Ash and the gang to question why he was so attached to Yanma anyways, when Yanma didn't even listen to him. This leads Zachary to reveal the backstory of how he first met Yanma. Essentially, one day, Zack and his father were on their way back from a glass delivery during a severe rainstorm when they spotted that the storm had brought a Yanma to the ground and it was injured. So, him and his dad took the Yanma home and took care of it, and Zachary grew very attached to it, from taking care of it, feeding it, playing with it, and even helped it regain its strength in an effort to try and befriend the Yanma. However, Zack's attempts to befriend the Yanma didn't really work that well, as soon as it got better, it proceeded to start flapping its wings and breaking all of the glass in his father's workshop, which was probably what made his father okay with releasing the Yanma right now. But anyways, after Yanma did this, Zack was obviously yelled at by his father, so he insisted that he would try and train the Yanma to make sure that it wouldn't break windows anymore, but the Yanma still continued to disobey him, and he wasn't able to train him, which led us to today. Ash and the gang were now touched by Zachary's story, and encouraged him to try and train the Yanma again. However, Zachary had realized, after recalling the story, that it truly was futile to train the Yanma, so he decided to release it after all, stating that Ash and the gang were right when they originally said that it was too much of a harm to Zack's father's reputation due to him being a glassmaker. Brock suggested that, instead, Zachary's dad simply move the location of his factory, but Misty rebutted that that would not help whatsoever, as Yanma would just go to that location. Ash then suggested that they should instead do plastic windows instead of glass, but Misty retorted that that would mean that Zachary's father would no longer have a glass-making business. Ash and Brock got pissed off, as they were just trying to help Zachary out so he wouldn't have to release Yanma, but Zachary assured them that it was fine. He was going to release Yanma. He had already made his decision, and further justified it by saying that if Yanma was out in the woods, it wouldn't be able to cause a danger to anyone. With that, Zachary feeds his Yanma one more time, and then brings him out to the forest, waving goodbye, as he tells Yanma to fly away, with Ash, Brock, and Misty watching as the Yanma obliges and begins to fly away. The Yanma then becomes a little confused, though, as it looks back and sees Zachary running away with tears in his eyes, although it simply just shrugs it off as humans just being weird as fuck and continues on flying away. As for Zachary, he was crying because, although he knew that he had to release Yanma, since it would have kept causing trouble otherwise, he really didn't want to. And that much was obvious. Ash, Brock, and Misty run after him to make sure he doesn't do anything reckless in his current mood, but he unfortunately just ends up hurting himself as he was so sad, crying, that he couldn't see where he was going, so he trips over a rock. Tripping over a rock causes him to get a little dazed as he remembers all of his memories with Yanma. This is the final straw that made the already hesitant Zachary change his mind, and he instantly makes a beeline back to the forest, almost immediately after releasing Yanma, wanting to get it back. Ash and the gang are proud of Zachary for sticking up for what he wanted, so they decide to follow him into the forest to see them reunite. Unfortunately, though, when Zachary returns to the spot where he released Yanma, Yanma was of course gone. And I mean, that was Zachary's fault. He had told it to fly away, and it actually listened for once, and did. Zachary begins to cry even harder, but Ash and the gang comfort him, promising that they would help him find Yanma. Honestly, though, he should just let it go. This is a sign to just let it the fuck go, man. On second thought, maybe not, because you know who else was walking through the forest? Team Rocket. They were of course looking for Ash and the gang so they could spy on them as usual, but of course they would also settle for Pokemon as well, as that was the whole reason why they wanted to spy on Ash and the gang, so thankfully for them, they spotted Yanma in the sky. Upon identifying it as a Yanma, Team Rocket waited for it to land by the river for a drink, and while it was distracted, James threw a net over it, capturing it. Yanma tried its best to fly away, but then Team Rocket tied it down with a rope. Team Rocket were overjoyed at successfully catching a Pokemon, but Jessie kept getting Yanma's name wrong due to never having seen one before, calling it Yo-Yo. Meowth bitterly corrects her on the correct pronunciation, which reminds Jessie of a poem that had Yanma in it that was, if you add wings to a Caterpie, it would look just like a Yanma. See? And I mean, to be fair, that poem wasn't wrong, but Yanma was obviously offended at being called a fucking Caterpie, so it tried to fly away yet again, only to be restrained by the rope yet again, as James pulled on it. Yanma simply tried harder, flapping its wings at the same speed that it did when it broke the glass in town, and as a result, it breaks the windows in a nearby forest cabin. Jessie and James were amazed by the Yanma's abilities, and questioned how it was able to do this, leading James to reveal that he had a Pokemon guide that was presumably given by Giovanni, and it read that Yanma can break windows from loud shockwaves that it produces with its wings. Knowing that Yanma can break glass windows, this gives Jessie the idea to have Yanma purposely break glass windows, and then Team Rocket would come in and sell some glass, so that they could make some money. So essentially, they were going to do what a lot of people in town had accused Zachary's father of doing. Jessie then stated her plan in a poem, as James and Meowth warned her not to do so, as Yanma seemed not to like poems, although I think it just didn't like being called a Caterpie. Anyways, Team Rocket decided to go through with Jessie's plan, using the most nearby town as their victim, being Zachary's town. Meowth ties Yanma to Victreebel, and has Victreebel enter the town, with Yanma still struggling and flapping its wings, which causes all the glass in the town to begin getting destroyed. This obviously severely angers all of the townspeople, but then Team Rocket make their entrance, as they hold up a sign that they were from the Glazed Over Glass Company, and James opens up an ice cream cart, and begins to hand out panes of glass from inside of it to all of the townsfolk. In exchange for money, of course, which all of the townsfolk, along with Mr. Strussel, were very happy to pay, so they could get new windows. However, Mr. Strussel obviously questioned why Team Rocket was keeping the glass inside of an ice cream truck. Well, the real reason was because none of this was actually glass, it was instead frosted ice. So not only were Team Rocket actually breaking the windows so that they could sell glass, they weren't even selling glass to begin with. Of course, Team Rocket didn't reveal this, and simply lied that they specialized in frosted windows, and their glass being in an ice cream truck was proof of how cool it was. Damn, fucking terrible puns. This explanation was somehow enough for all the townspeople, so they continued to buy glass until all the windows were repaired, and Team Rocket had received a ton of money, leading Team Rocket to celebrate by buying themselves a huge meal, as they gloat about how genius their plans were, and also discuss their plans to swiftly leave the town before the townspeople inevitably found out that they had been scammed with ice. They were obviously going to finish their buffet meal first, though, and Yanma felt that it was entitled to a part of this meal for helping destroy the glass, so it tried to grab a donut, but Jessie grabbed it first, and yelled at the Yanma, telling it that it couldn't eat it. Believe it or not, this actually made the Yanma begin to miss Zach a little bit, as he remembered how Zach would let him eat whatever he wanted. Meanwhile, back with Ash and the gang, they had somehow got separated from Zach while looking for Yanma, so now Ash and the gang were trying to find both Yanma and Zach, and eventually stumbled into a Pokemon Center, wanting to check there. The only people they found inside, though, were Nurse Joy and Zach's dad. They questioned the two on if they had seen Zach or Yanma, and both of them deny. We then see that Zach had got separated from Ash and the gang because he decided to go back into town to ask some people if Yanma came by over there. He then gets worried that Yanma had come by, as he sees the windows without glass, as all of the glass, quote-unquote, that the citizens bought had already melted away by this point. When Zach goes to question Mr. Strussel and two other people on Yanma's whereabouts, they immediately accuse him and his dad of being responsible for the Yanma breaking the glass, and that he was also related to Team Rocket's ice selling scheme, thinking that Zach and his dad had essentially hired Team Rocket to do the selling for them, so that they could make a profit from all the destroyed glass. Zachary tried to rebuttal that he wasn't involved, but just like before, Mr. Strussel dragged Zach along with him as Mr. Strussel went to go confront Zach's father. Meanwhile, back at the Pokemon Center, although Zach's father hadn't seen Yanma, he did at least explain that there was more of a reason as to why he didn't want the Yanma to stick around anymore than just his reputation being injured, stating that he could withstand that, but what he couldn't withstand was if Yanma broke his new stained glass that he had spent forever working on. explaining that he really felt bad for forcing his son to release his friend, but the stained glass was just too much work to have to keep mass producing. He couldn't risk it getting destroyed. Ash and the gang tried their best to convince Zack's dad to give Zack another chance to properly train it, but Zack simply showed them the stained glass that he was working on, hoping that he could convince them that the stained glass was more important. And although Ash and the gang did really admire the stained glass, thinking it was beautiful as fuck, this didn't change their tune. So Nurse Joy tried to step in and inform them of how Yanma had broke the medical glass in the Pokemon Recovery Bay before, almost injuring several of her patient Pokemon. She hoped that this would convince Ash and the gang to stop their relentless persisting, and it certainly was about to, as Ash and the gang began to feel bad for all the patient Pokemon that had to endure that. But just then, Mr. Strussel arrives, dragging Zack with him, and tries to tell Zack's father about what Zack had apparently done, stating that he used his Yanma to destroy all the windows and then partnered up with some scam artists to sell fake glass. Mr. Strussel then accused Zack's dad of being involved as well, but Zack's dad and Zack both denied their involvement. Ash and the gang stand up for Zack and his father, stating that there must have been someone else responsible, and as if on cue, Team Rocket then show up to the Pokemon Center, realizing that they hadn't broken its glass yet, so they could still try and scam Nurse Joy. So while Jesse and James hide in their glassmaker disguises, they have Meowth ride Victreebel, still having Yanma tied to it, so they can destroy the Pokemon Center's glass. However, when all the townspeople spot Team Rocket hiding behind a bush, waiting for Meowth to break the glass to the Pokemon Center, they all come to the conclusion that Team Rocket must have been the ones responsible for breaking the glass, also that they could sell the fake stuff, indicating that Zachary and his dad weren't involved after all. Upon noticing that they have been discovered, Jesse and James throw off their glassmaker disguises and do their motto, stating that they would keep the Yanma for themselves, even after Zack begged them to give them back. Ash sends out Chikorita to try and retrieve Yanma, along with Misty sending out her Poliwhirl to help, but Jesse decided to use Yanma for the battle, to fight Ash's Chikorita and Misty's Poliwhirl. However, before the battle begins, Zack's father begs Team Rocket not to use Yanma, stating that if it flapped its wings in battle, then that would break all of his stained glass, revealing that the Pokemon Center was actually made of his new stained glass. He didn't just have random-ass panes of it sitting in the middle of nowhere. Team Rocket rebuttal that Yanma wouldn't destroy the glass if it didn't get angered, because then it would have no reason to flap its wings. So, Jesse and James tell Ash and the gang to simply let Yanma attack their Pokemon and not attack back, as to not anger the Yanma if they really wanted to protect Zack's father's glass. Essentially, Team Rocket agreed to not fight, but they were going to use that to their advantage. Ash obviously refuses to not battle Team Rocket and orders Chikorita to go in for an attack, but Zack's dad pleads with him to not attack, jumping in the way. With Ash distracted, this gave Jessie the opportunity to send out her Arbok to do some extra damage to Ash and Misty's Pokemon, although she clarified that she would make Yanma battle if Ash and the gang tried to attack. Ash tries to think of a solution, but he can't before Arbok uses Wrap to wrap Poliwhirl and Chikorita in its tail. As Arbok then goes to tackle Poliwhirl and Chikorita while they were still wrapped, Ash tries his best to order an attack, but he stops himself. As he was too indecisive, he couldn't decide whether to sacrifice the glass or not. Misty then notices that Yanma was sad from being with Team Rocket after they had refused to give him food. So she suggests that maybe Yanma would actually willingly come back to Zack this time, so Zack tries to recall Yanma into its Pokeball, and it actually does come back. Although he had to throw the Pokeball to Yanma in order to reach it, so it was now stuck on the ground, so he had to go and retrieve it, and on his way, James sent out his Victreebel to intercept Zack. Thankfully, Zack was able to retrieve the Pokeball, as Victreebel had become distracted by Chikorita's Vine Whip and Poliwhirl's Water Gun that were aiming towards Arbok. Although Arbok was knocked out, Victreebel wanted to help Arbok out and avenge it, so it ran away from Zack and towards Chikorita and Poliwhirl, and used Razor Leaf, which knocks Chikorita and Poliwhirl down. Zack, however, wasn't really concerned with that right now, as he was just happy that he was able to retrieve Yanma, as he then sent it out of its Pokeball immediately after recalling it, and told it that he would never abandon it ever again. Upon seeing Zachary's determination to stick by his Yanma and never abandoned it, this caused Zack's father to wonder if maybe Zack could finally command Yanma after all, and he wanted to see if Zack and Yanma could truly achieve a bond. He then told his son that he could simply make more stained glass if Yanma broke it, stating that what was more important to him right now was seeing his son flourish, and prove to all the townspeople that he could command Yanma. Essentially, Zack's father was willing to put his reputation and his work on the line, just so that Zack would no longer have to worry about being accused of having a bad Yanma if he could prove that he could train it and command it in battle. Zack's dad didn't want to see the Yanma gone, so he would do everything in his power to make sure that Yanma and his son could prove themselves. Zack initially didn't believe his father at first, but eventually he agreed to battle Yanma, especially after realizing that with Chikorita and Poliwhirl currently down for the count, there was no one else that could battle Team Rocket. So, Zack sent out Yanma as Arbok recovered, but before Arbok could attack, Ash used his Pokedex to check out all of Yanma's moves so he could tell Zack which ones were available for him to use. Yanma could use Tackle, Double Team, and Sonic Boom. Ash questioned how a small Pokemon like Yanma could learn Sonic Boom, with Brock hypothesizing that it was likely because if Yanma could control the shockwaves that it released from its wings, then it would be powerful enough to create one huge sonic shock. Sure enough, Zack orders his Yanma to use Sonic Boom, which was powerful enough to knock out Arbok and push it away, as Yanma was able to control its wild wing flapping. Victreebel then tried to use Razor Leaf, but Yanma used Sonic Boom to deflect the leaves, and then used a Double Team to confuse Victreebel. Victreebel tried another Razor Leaf, but the leaves simply hit all of the Double Team copies instead of the real Yanma. With Victreebel still confused, Chikorita and Poliwhirl recovered and took the places of Yanma's double team copies, so Poliwhirl, Chikorita, and Yanma all charged towards Victory Bell, tackling it, sending it blasting off into Team Rocket, sending Team Rocket blasting off. Which also caused Team Rocket to drop all the money that they had collected, leading it to get returned to all the townspeople. Yay! Zack's dad and Mr. Strussel then commend Zachary on finally being able to control his Yanma and have them be able to work as a team, to the point where Yanma no longer went crazy with its wings and broke any of the glass during its attacks. Mr. Strussel then apologizes to Zack for accusing him of being responsible for breaking the glass, and promises that the next time Zachary and Yanma came over to his shop, they would get special treatment with special baked goods. The episode then ends with everyone watching, as Zack's dad puts in all of his stained glass inside the Pokemon Center, making it look extremely beautiful.